To my granddaughter Iris, I leave the envelope in my safe deposit box. She'll know what to do with it. The estate attorney read aloud, his voice neutral and professional, while my cousins shifted in their seats with barely concealed satisfaction at having just divided $10 million among themselves. That concludes the distribution of Evelyn Thornwood's estate. My cousin Bradley actually laughed, a short, sharp bark of amusement that he tried to disguise as a cough, while his sister Margot examined her manicured nails and murmured something about always being Grandma's least practical grandchild. I sat in the corner of the attorney's conference room in Reno, Nevada, holding a sealed envelope that felt too light to contain anything of value, watching my family celebrate their windfalls while I received what appeared to be nothing more than a final goodbye letter. What none of them understood, what I wouldn't fully grasp until 48 hours later, standing on cracked desert earth with a geologist who couldn't stop shaking his head, was that Grandma hadn't left me less than my cousins. She'd left me everything that actually mattered. The Thornwood family had always measured love in dollars. My grandfather, Walter Thornwood, had made his fortune in Nevada mining during the 1960s and 70s, silver mostly, with some copper and gold. He died when I was 12, leaving behind a complicated legacy, substantial wealth, 3 children who'd grown up entitled, and a widow who'd spent the next 30 years watching her family fracture over money she'd never cared about. Grandma Evelyn was different from the rest of them. She'd grown up on a ranch in rural Nevada, the daughter of people who'd worked the land for 3 generations. She'd met my grandfather when she was 17, and he was 22, already dreaming of mineral wealth while she was dreaming of horses and open sky. They'd been married for 53 years before he died, and she'd spent every one of those years slightly out of step with the wealth he accumulated. Money doesn't make people happy, she'd told me once, when I was about 14. It just makes them more of what they already are. Your grandfather was a generous man, so money made him more generous. Your Aunt Patricia is an anxious woman, so money made her more anxious. Your Uncle Richard is greedy, so money made him insufferable. What about you, Grandma? I was always a woman who loved the land. Money just meant I could buy more of it. I hadn't understood what she meant. Not then. My position in the family had always been precarious. I was the daughter of the black sheep. My mother, Grace, the youngest of the 3 Thornwood children, who'd married a schoolteacher named Henry Whitman and chosen a modest life over the family's expectations. They'd moved to Portland, Oregon, raised me with values that confused my cousins, and died together in a car accident when I was 23. The Thornwood family had attended the funeral. They'd offered condolences, help, money. I'd taken none of it. Maybe that's when they decided I was strange, or ungrateful, or simply not one of them. Maybe it had happened earlier, during all those childhood summers when my cousins competed over toys and attention while I followed Grandma around her property, learning the names of plants and the shapes of rock formations. Either way, by the time Grandma Evelyn died at 91, I was firmly established as the family afterthought, the granddaughter who'd become a geological surveyor instead of a lawyer or investor, who lived in a small apartment in Boise and spent most of her time trudging through remote wilderness cataloging mineral deposits. At least she's doing something with rocks, my cousin Bradley had said once. Following in great-grandpa's footsteps, sort of. In a minimum wage kind of way. He didn't know what geological surveyors earned. He didn't know much of anything about my life, really. None of them did. The envelope sat on my passenger seat for the entire drive back to Boise. For hours of desert highway, sagebrush and distant mountains, the kind of landscape that had always felt more like home than any family gathering. I'd left Reno immediately after the will reading, unable to stomach the celebration, the champagne someone had produced, the discussions about investment strategies, the way my cousin spouses had immediately started planning renovations and vacations. $10 million split 4 ways. $2.5 million each for Bradley, Margot, Preston, and Olivia. For me, an envelope. I wasn't angry exactly. Disappointment suggests expectation, and I'd stopped expecting anything from my grandmother's estate long ago. She'd been increasingly distant in her final years, retreating from family contact, communicating mainly through brief phone calls and the occasional handwritten card. I'd assumed she'd forgotten me, but the wording of the will suggested otherwise. She'll know what to do with it. What did she think I would know? I opened the envelope that night in my apartment with a glass of cheap wine and the particular loneliness that comes from losing the last person who truly knew you. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a small brass key. The paper contained coordinates, latitude and longitude, written in Grandma's increasingly shaky handwriting. Below them was a note. Iris, asterisk, you're the only one who will understand what this is. You're the only one who ever paid attention to the land itself, not just what could be taken from it. Asterisk. Asterisk, I bought this property in 1987, the year your mother was born. Your grandfather never knew about it. No one knew. It was my secret place, the land I grew up looking at from my parents' ranch, dreaming about owning someday. Asterisk. Asterisk, I never did anything with it. I just wanted it to exist, untouched, the way I remembered from childhood. Asterisk. Asterisk, but you need to see what's there now. The world has changed. What was worthless when I bought it might be something else entirely today. Asterisk. Asterisk, the key opens the lockbox at the county recorder's office in Winnemucca. The deed is inside. Asterisk. Asterisk, I love you, granddaughter. I always saw your mother in you, the only one of my children who understood that some things matter more than money. Asterisk. Use this gift wisely. Grandma Evelyn. The coordinates pointed to a location in northern Nevada, about 60 miles from Winnemucca. I knew the general area, had worked on surveys nearby, cataloging mineral deposits for energy companies exploring geothermal potential. It was remote, empty, the kind of high desert landscape that most people drove through without a second glance. But I'd never surveyed this particular parcel. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to Winnemucca. The county recorder's office was a small building on the main street, staffed by a woman named Dolores who'd clearly been doing this job for decades. A lockbox? Let me check the old records. She disappeared into a back room, returning 15 minutes later with a dusty metal container. Evelyn Thornwood. Box 847. Been here since 1987. The key worked. Inside was a deed, original, signed, notarized, for 3,000 acres of what the document described as unimproved rangeland. That's a big piece of property, Dolores observed. Your grandmother's? She just passed. Left it to me. Condolences. She examined the deed with professional interest. You know, there's been some activity up that way lately. Energy companies, mineral surveys. Might be worth looking into what they're after. I'm a geological surveyor. Dolores smiled. Well then, sounds like you've got some homework to do. I spent the next week researching. The property Grandma had purchased in 1987 was worthless at the time, remote, waterless, unsuitable for ranching or development. She'd paid $12,000 for 3,000 acres, roughly $4 per acre, and the land had sat untouched ever since. But the world had changed, as her letter suggested. The region had become one of the most promising lithium exploration targets in North America. The same geological formations that made the land worthless for agriculture made it potentially priceless for battery production. 3 major mining companies had purchased adjacent properties in the past 5 years. Core samples from nearby parcels had revealed significant lithium concentrations. No one had surveyed Grandma's land because no one knew it existed separately from the surrounding BLM territory. It had been invisible, a private inholding in a sea of federal land, owned by a woman who'd never filed for permits, never conducted exploration, never done anything to draw attention to what she possessed. I contacted a former colleague, Dr. Marcus Reinhold, a geochemist at the University of Nevada who specialized in lithium deposits. You want me to look at what? Private land in the Thacker Pass region. His voice carried the particular interest of a scientist hearing about unexplored territory. That area is potentially significant. No one's been able to survey comprehensively because of land ownership complications. I might have access to a parcel. 3,000 acres. Iris. That could be major. Can you get me there? The survey took 3 days. Marcus brought equipment, graduate students, and the barely contained excitement of someone who suspected he was about to find something important. I brought my own surveying tools, my training, and a growing sense that Grandma had known exactly what she was leaving me. We collected soil samples, conducted electromagnetic surveys, mapped geological formations. The land was exactly as Grandma had described, harsh, beautiful, unchanged from whatever she'd seen as a child looking at it from her parents' ranch. But beneath the surface, something extraordinary was waiting. Marcus called me into the makeshift field lab on the third evening. His face wore the particular expression of a scientist trying to process impossible data. "Iris, I need you to look at these results." The screens showed concentration analyses, geological projections, reserve estimates. Numbers I understood professionally, but couldn't quite accept personally. This can't be right. I've run the tests 4 times. The lithium concentration is among the highest I've ever documented. And based on the geological structure, this deposit extends throughout most of your 3,000 acres. What does that mean? In terms of value, Marcus sat down heavily. I've been doing this for 25 years. I helped survey the deposits at Thacker Pass that are now worth billions. He paused, running calculations on his tablet. Conservative estimate, based on current lithium prices and projected demand? Your grandmother's property is sitting on approximately $4.2 billion worth of extractable lithium. Billion. With a B. With a B. The news reached my family 3 weeks later. I hadn't contacted them directly. The information had leaked through mining industry channels, through Geological Society publications, through the particular rumor networks that carry news of major mineral discoveries. By the time Bradley called me, he'd already heard enough to know that the envelope he'd laughed at contained something beyond his comprehension. "Iris, we need to talk about Grandma's estate. The estate was distributed. You got your share. But this land, this wasn't disclosed properly. If it's worth what people are saying." "It wasn't part of the estate, Bradley.
It was a separate bequest."
"A letter and a key. That's what the will said." "You can't possibly expect. I expect you to honor Grandma's wishes. The same way you were happy to honor them when you thought I'd received nothing." Silence. "This isn't over," he said. "We're contesting the will. Contest whatever you want. The deed is in my name. The property was never part of the estate. Your lawyers can explain the difference between a bequest and an inheritance." The legal battle lasted 8 months. My cousins hired expensive attorneys, filed motions, demanded forensic examination of Grandma's mental competency at the time the will was written. They argued that the property should have been disclosed, that the letter was a codicil that hadn't been properly witnessed, that I'd somehow manipulated a dying woman into giving me hidden assets. None of it worked. The deed was legitimate, filed in 1987, completely separate from the estate. The will had specifically mentioned the envelope, making the bequest explicit and intentional. 3 different handwriting experts confirmed that the letter was genuine. 2 psychiatrists who'd evaluated Grandma in her final years testified that she'd been completely lucid. The judge dismissed the case with particular emphasis. The decedent clearly intended for this property to pass to her granddaughter Iris Whitman. She structured the bequest precisely to ensure this outcome, separate from the remainder of her estate. The court finds no evidence of fraud, undue influence, or testamentary incapacity. Case dismissed. Bradley didn't speak to me after the ruling. Neither did Margot, Preston, or Olivia. I was fine with that. The development of the lithium deposit took years to structure properly. I didn't want to strip mine Grandma's land. That would have betrayed everything she'd tried to preserve. Instead, I partnered with a company specializing in minimal impact extraction, using newer technologies that disturbed less surface area and required less water than traditional lithium mining. I retained majority ownership while allowing experienced operators to manage the technical aspects. The revenue projections were staggering. Hundreds of millions annually once production began, potentially billions over the life of the deposit. But the money wasn't the point. It never had been. I used the first distributions to establish the Evelyn Thornwood Foundation, focused on land conservation and indigenous rights in Nevada. I funded scholarships for students from rural communities pursuing geology and environmental science. I purchased additional land around Grandma's property, creating a buffer zone that would remain undeveloped regardless of what happened to the mine. And I built a small cabin at the edge of the property, in a location that matched the view Grandma would have seen from her childhood ranch. I go there sometimes when I need to remember what actually matters. 2 years after the lawsuit, my cousin Olivia contacted me. She was the youngest of the four, the one I'd been closest to during childhood summers. She'd been quieter than the others during the legal proceedings, less vocally hostile. "Can we talk?" she asked. "Not about money. Not about the lawsuit. Just talk." We met in Reno, at a coffee shop neither of us had been to before. Neutral territory for a conversation that felt dangerous. "I want to apologize," she said, "for how we treated you. How we've always treated you. You were protecting your interests. I was being exactly like the rest of them. Like everyone in this family who measures everything in dollars." She stirred her coffee, without drinking it. "Bradley and Margot and Preston, they're still furious. Still convinced you somehow cheated. But I've been thinking about it and Grandma knew, didn't she? She knew exactly what she was leaving you. I don't think she knew about the lithium specifically. But she knew the land mattered. She knew I would understand that in a way the rest of you wouldn't. Because we only cared about the money. Because you never asked why she bought 3,000 acres of worthless desert. You never wondered what she saw in that landscape. You accepted her as Grandpa's wife, the family matriarch, without ever seeing who she was underneath." Olivia was quiet for a long moment. She used to tell me stories about growing up on her parents' ranch. I thought they were boring. They weren't boring. They were her. You just weren't listening. The relationship with Olivia has slowly rebuilt. She's the only one of my cousins I speak to now. The others have maintained their distance, their resentment, their conviction that I stole something that should have been theirs. They didn't understand Grandma Evelyn when she was alive. They don't understand her bequests now. They see $4.2 billion and assume it was always about money, that Grandma hid this asset because she wanted to enrich me at their expense. But that's not what happened. Grandma bought that land in 1987 because it was the landscape of her childhood, the view she'd dreamed about owning since she was a little girl. She kept it secret because it was hers, untouched by the family's obsession with wealth, preserved from the mining operations that had defined her husband's career. She left it to me because I was the only one who would understand. Not because I deserved money more than my cousins. Not because she loved me more than them. But because I was the only one who would value the land itself, who would see what she'd seen, who would protect what she'd preserved for over 3 decades. The lithium beneath the surface was an accident of geology and timing. The real inheritance was understanding what matters. Last month, I scattered Grandma's ashes on the property. Her will had specified cremation but hadn't indicated where she wanted her remains. I made the decision myself, without consulting the family. They'd forfeited the right to be consulted when they tried to take the land from me. I stood at the edge of the cabin, looking out at the same view she'd known her whole life, and I let the wind carry her home. "I understand now," I told her. "I understand why you bought this place. Why you kept it secret. Why you left it to me." The desert didn't answer. It never does. But I felt something settle into place, some final piece of the puzzle that had been my grandmother's life. She'd been a woman who loved the land. Money had just allowed her to buy more of it. And in the end, she'd found the one grandchild who loved it too. My grandmother left me a letter while my cousins split $10 million. They laughed when I opened the envelope. They stopped laughing when they learned what was inside. But the money isn't the point of this story. It never was. The point is that Grandma knew me. She saw who I was, what I valued, how I'd use what she left behind. She didn't leave me wealth. She left me trust. She left me a piece of land that had held her childhood dreams for 35 years, waiting for someone who would understand. My cousins got $2.5 million each. I got my grandmother's heart. And that, more than any mineral deposit or legal victory, is what changed everything. Some inheritances are measured in dollars. Others are measured in understanding. Grandma left me both. But if I had to choose, I'd take the understanding every time. The land was always the point. The lithium was just the universe's way of making sure I could protect it forever. That's what Grandma knew. That's why she chose me. That's why the letter, not the deposit, was the real inheritance. I was the only one who would know what to do.